Most footballers think they're losing because they aren't talented enough. They watch a player glide past defenders effortlessly. They see someone pull off skills they've never even attempted. They notice teammates improving faster and assume those players were simply born with something they don't have. And that's exactly where the problem begins. Because some of the most dangerous players in football didn't start as the most talented. In fact, many of them started as average. Average technique, average speed, average confidence, average everything. Yet somehow, a few years later, they're dominating matches while the naturally gifted players they used to admire have stopped improving. Why? Because talent gives you an advantage, but it also gives you a trap. And most players never see it coming. The biggest lie in football is that talent guarantees success. It doesn't. Talent only changes your starting point. It doesn't determine where you finish. Think about two players. One player can naturally control difficult passes, dribble comfortably, and pick up skills quickly. The other struggles with almost everything. His first touch isn't clean, his decision-making is inconsistent, his weak foot feels useless, every training session feels harder. Most people assume the talented player wins that race. At first, they're right. But football isn't measured over 6 weeks. It's measured over years, and that's where everything changes. Because improvement isn't determined by how good you are today, it's determined by how you respond to being bad. And average players are often forced to develop habits that talented players never need. That's why so many talented players become stuck, and why average players eventually pass them. The real difference isn't talent, it's adaptation. Most players misunderstand improvement. They think football development is about adding strengths. But the best players become elite because they eliminate weaknesses. And average players spend years doing exactly that. When you're average, every mistake hurts. You lose possession, you get exposed in matches, you struggle in training, you can't hide from your flaws, so you're forced to fix them. Meanwhile, talented players often survive despite their flaws. Their natural ability covers problems. Maybe they're technically gifted but tactically unaware. Maybe they're fast but don't scan the field. Maybe they're creative but lack discipline. The problem is those weaknesses don't punish them immediately, so they never feel urgency. And what doesn't get punished rarely gets fixed. Football has a way of exposing everything eventually. As the level rises, natural advantages become less special. Everyone gets faster, everyone gets stronger, everyone becomes more technical. The gap closes, and when that happens, hidden weaknesses suddenly become visible. That's when the average player who spent years fixing problems starts catching up, and eventually overtakes. Here's the first lesson. Average players develop learning skills. Talented players often develop performance skills. There's a huge difference. A talented player can rely on what already works. An average player has to constantly figure things out. Every training session becomes an experiment. Every mistake becomes feedback. Every bad game becomes information. Over time, they become experts at improving. And that's a superpower. Because football is a game of adaptation. The player who learns fastest usually improves fastest. Imagine two midfielders. One dominates youth football because he's naturally gifted. The other struggles but constantly studies positioning, scanning, receiving angles, and decision-making. 5 years later, who has a better chance? The answer isn't obvious, because the second player built a system for growth. The first player built a system for survival. Growth wins in the long run. The second lesson is uncomfortable. Struggle creates awareness, and awareness creates improvement. Most players avoid struggle. They want training to feel smooth. They want confidence all the time. They want success immediately. But improvement rarely feels comfortable. The average player experiences failure constantly. At first, that's frustrating. But eventually, it becomes valuable. Because failure reveals exactly what needs work. Let's say you lose possession 10 times in a match. Most players blame technique. But maybe the real issue is scanning. Maybe you're receiving the ball without checking your surroundings. Maybe the mistake happened 5 seconds before the turnover. Average players who improve learn to investigate mistakes. Talented players often explain mistakes away. One group searches for causes, the other searches for excuses. Only one group gets better. The third lesson is where things become dangerous. Average players build discipline. Talented players often build dependence. When talent solves your problems, effort becomes optional. And anything optional becomes inconsistent. You've probably seen this yourself. A player dominates training when motivated, looks incredible on good days, unstoppable when confident, but disappears when things get difficult. Why? Because their success depends on feeling good. Average players don't have that luxury. They learn to work when confidence is low. They learn to train when motivation disappears. They learn to improve without immediate rewards. Eventually, consistency becomes their advantage. And consistency is one of the most underrated weapons in football. A player training at 80% effort every day will often outperform a player training at 100% effort twice a week. Not because they're better, because they're available. Development rewards repetition. The player who shows up most often usually wins. The fourth lesson separates serious players from everyone else. Average players become obsessed with efficiency. Talented players often become obsessed with expression. Football isn't about showing what you can do, it's about doing what the game requires. That's a massive difference. Talented players sometimes fall in love with difficult solutions, extra touches, fancy dribbles, complicated decisions. Average players often can't rely on those things, so they learn simpler football, quicker passes, better positioning, earlier scanning, smarter movement. And here's the funny part. Simple football becomes more effective as the level rises. Watch elite players closely. Most aren't performing magic every possession. They're making correct decisions repeatedly. Football rewards effectiveness, not entertainment. The player who understands this develops much faster. Now let's talk about what this looks like in real matches. Imagine a winger receiving the ball near the touchline. The talented player immediately thinks about beating the defender. The improving player thinks differently. He scans first. Where is support? Where is space? What is the defender expecting? What's the highest percentage decision? Sometimes the answer is dribbling, sometimes it's a simple pass, sometimes it's recycling possession. The point is that improvement comes from solving situations, not showing ability. This mindset changes everything. The same applies in training. Most players judge sessions by how impressive they looked. Elite improvers judge sessions by what they learned. Did they identify weaknesses? Did they improve decision-making? Did they solve recurring mistakes? Did they become more efficient? That's the scoreboard that actually matters, because football careers are built in the invisible moments. The extra analysis after training, the deliberate practice, the willingness to repeat boring fundamentals, the decision to fix weaknesses instead of hiding them. Those moments don't look exciting, but they create dangerous players. And here's the biggest misunderstanding of all. This isn't an attack on talent. Talent is real. Talent matters. If two players work equally hard, the more talented player usually has the advantage. The problem is that equal effort almost never happens. That's where everything changes, because talent often lowers urgency. Average players feel urgency every day. They know they need improvement. They know they can't rely on gifts. They know weaknesses have consequences. So they keep building week after week, month after month, year after year. And eventually, those small improvements become impossible to ignore. The talented player who relied on natural ability stays almost the same. The average player becomes unrecognizable. That's why football is full of surprises. The best player at 14 isn't always the best player at 20. The most talented player isn't always the most successful. The early winner isn't always the final winner. Development isn't linear, it's cumulative. Small improvements stack. Discipline stacks, awareness stacks, learning stacks, and eventually those stacks become impossible to stop. So if you've ever felt average, understand something important. Average is not a verdict, it's a starting point. Right now, somewhere in the world, a naturally gifted player is depending on talent. And somewhere else, an average player is building habits. The gifted player might win today, maybe tomorrow too. But football doesn't reward who starts ahead. It rewards who keeps evolving. Because talent can open the door, but growth determines how far you walk through it. And the players who understand that are usually the ones still improving long after everyone else has stopped. So stop asking whether you're talented enough. Ask a better question. Are you improving faster than you were 6 months ago? Because that's the question that actually decides your future. And if you commit to constant improvement, constant learning, and constant adaptation, you'll discover something most players never realize. Being average isn't the problem. Staying average is. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more football development content designed to help you train smarter, think faster, and become the player your opponents hate facing.